Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Tuesday. We're going to do another voyage into contemporary poetry every Tuesday from now until the end of time, until we get a feel for what we like and what we don't like, what works and what doesn't work. And once again, I thought we would go with... we won't always do this. We have an infinite number of Tuesdays ahead of us. But once again, I thought we'd go with poetry that is going to reach a wide, popular audience. In other words, that's in a magazine or a newspaper of some kind, as opposed to looking at a new volume of some new poet. We will do that. But for today, I thought we'd go right back to the New Yorker. Look at that cover. Isn't that beautiful? It's by Anna Perini, and it's called A New Leaf. Isn't that lovely? Take a minute to study that. There's light snow in the air, and everything else is black or gray. It's featureless. Even the traffic light has no color. The only color is this young woman reading a book. And you'll notice what's missing. She's not reading a tablet, and she doesn't have those omnipresent, stupid earphones in. She's lost in a book, in an otherwise colorless world. I just think that's lovely. Absolutely lovely. And this issue had some good bookish stuff in it. It had James Wood doing a long write-up of Guy Gunaratney's debut novel, A Mad and Furious City, that had some good Woodsian type insights. And it wasn't my favorite write-up of the book, but I was happy to see it get the attention. And Jerome Groopman, who is kind of the New Yorker's in-house medical writer, him and Atul Gawande, does a review of that new book about human blood called 9 Pints. That is just, the book I thought was fantastic. And his write-up of it is really good as well. So there was good literary stuff in here, but there were also poems. And I thought we'd go over the poems. I want to read you both of them. Also, I did not know when I was reading in Our Mad and Furious City, and I was liking it, and I was liking the I think I mentioned the rhetorical gambles that it takes, the chances that it takes. All that time, for one reason or other, I was letting the side down because all that time that I was reading and thinking about, and engaging with, and loving that book, I was unaware that its author is a super hottie. I must be getting old. But I want to take you through. We won't always do 2 poems, but I want to take you through both the poems in this issue. One is short and one is long. One is very bad, and one is, I think, very good. And I want to see what you think. And I will, once again, I will force myself to remember to include the poems down below. I'll write them out down below so that you can read them yourself without, going out to spend $10 on the New Yorker. Although this is a heck of an issue, and also a fantastic magazine. Any magazine with a cover like that. I tell you, I'm absolutely in love with the cover. It's the only thing from this issue that I will actually save in my box that covers 2019. But the first poem is by Terrance Hayes, and it's called American Sonnet for the New Year. Now, I want you to bear with me here, because this is, trust me, you're going to find it as hard, I think, you're going to find it as difficult going, as rough sledding listening to it, as you would reading it. This is the poem. Things got terribly ugly incredibly quickly. Things got ugly embarrassingly quickly. Actually, things got ugly unbelievably quickly. Honestly, things got ugly seemingly infrequently. Initially, things got ugly ironically usually. Awfully carefully, things got ugly unsuccessfully. Occasionally, things got ugly mostly painstakingly. Quietly, seemingly, things got ugly beautifully. Infrequently, things got ugly sadly. Especially frequently, unfortunately, things got ugly increasingly obviously, things got ugly suddenly. Embarrassingly, forcefully, things got really ugly. Regularly, truly, quickly, things got really incredibly ugly. Things will get less ugly, inevitably, hopefully. And that's the poem. And from that poem, we can tell one thing absolutely for sure, and that is that the writer just can't stand Donald Trump. And that yet his name is not in the poem, and I'd be willing to bet that any future collection of Terrance Hayes poetry will not annotate this poem to let the reader know what's going on. What is going on in that poem is nowhere guessable in the poem itself. The only thing you know for sure in the poem itself is that, like so many people, the author does not know how to use the word hopefully. He misuses the word hopefully. Most people do. Most people misuse the word hopefully as a synonym for I hope, or it is to be hoped. When that's not the case, but and it doesn't matter. It's a lexical quibble, except that you want your poets to know that. Maybe he does and doesn't care, one way or another. I think you'll admit, or maybe not. I'm going to hope that you will admit that that is bad. That is just a bad poem. You can tell in 2 seconds what its gimmick is, what is on its mind, so to speak. And it doesn't vary from that, and it doesn't deepen that. It doesn't do anything with that. It's just, I can't stand Trump. Not at all an unworthy place from which to draw a poem, but it's got to be a better poem than that. That was one of the poems in this New Yorker. The other poem, I think, is something completely different, something very much better. And I want to read it to you and talk about it a little with you. It's by Maggie Milner, and in the About the Author section at the beginning of this issue, we are told that Maggie Milner is at work on her first collection of poetry. So she's publishing individual poems here and there, but she doesn't even have a book yet. Imagine how happy she must have been to have one of her poems in the New Yorker. And it's a little bit long. It's a little bit longer than that one. I'm going to hope to do it justice because it is rhetorically complex. Not dauntingly so, not attention-grabbingly so. It's just this poet has thought about these words in their exact order in a way that I don't think applies to the previous poem. This is called Etiology. And I think there's a pun in the sound of the word etiology. But anyway, it's called Etiology, and it goes like this. I was born to watch the beavers chewing flood the pond. Fated to bear witness to such confident accretion, my life was bitten down into a point that pointed toward the dome, its whole shorn forest brought to thatch, incredibly, by teeth. There is a seal that spends each morning blunting its incisors on the ice, rasping open breathing holes that close if not routinely shaven back, until one day its teeth, now dull and domed, stop breaking through, the animal beating its soft enamel on the ceiling as it drowns. There can be no proceeding from. There is only gnawing through the visible, wearing down the center between living and its damages, until the center's broken door stops granting us admission to our lives. The beavers graft another layer on the dam. They slap their tails so loud a sound like falling dice skitters the smooth, unfrozen surface of the pond, or what had been the pond before it overflowed its banks and drowned the meadow and the campsite and the fire pit we used to turn our spits over, the tusky wooden tapers of our spits. I was born in time to see it swamp, my life a parallel, accumulative loss of definition. If I am still enough, the beavers will reveal their door, the jam of which they clot into a lodge before my eyes, the underwater hatch through which they their chambered penetralia take shape. My ways, my mammal acumen, are forgeries of theirs. To have been underwater all that time, salient to the outer world only as a dome, before tearing through the doorway of that world, loud and blue, and sure my life was mine. I very much like that. I'm grappling with it still. It makes me think, what is the author getting at here, especially with that repeated image of the dome? There's I think, a lament going on here in this poem, a fairly standard, again, like the last poem, the one that we read last year. It'll feel that way by the time we're done. Last week. It's a fairly standard gimmick in poetry for the poet to look at nature and lament the artificiality of their own life. You're watching nature, you're watching some natural thing, and all it knows is its life, and it knows no pretense, it knows no artifice. And it's a standard, what BookTube would call a trope in poetry, for the poet to look at that with longing. I've never understood that myself at all, none whatsoever. I've never understood that. I don't see why you would long to do that if you can read and write and be complex and get discount tickets to Beethoven's Third Symphony at Symphony Hall on Thursday. I don't see why you would yearn for the simplicity of the the simple fulfillment of a different species of animal when you have your own forms of fulfillment as your own species of animal, that some of which are wonderful. But I like the way it's done in this poem. That what was it there? My ways, my mammal acumen, are forgeries of theirs. To have been underwater all that time, salient to the outer world only as a dome, before tearing through the doorway of that world, loud and blue, and sure my life was mine. There's an evocation there. I don't know how. I somehow suspect. I suspect that Maggie Milner, I don't know her from a hole in the wall, but I'm going to guess that she spends a lot of time in Brooklyn coffee shops and has never actually watched beavers at work. It's since watching beavers at work, especially when it's not summer, can be uncomfortable. We get mentioned in the poem of the unfrozen surface of the pond. The fact that the narrator of the poem needs to mention that the surface is unfrozen leads him to think that cold might still be invoked here. But one way or another, you can imagine watching beavers. You don't have to do it to write a poem about it. But one way or another, even though it's a familiar gimmick in poetry, and even though the gimmick itself has always struck me as a little bit labored, I liked how it's done in this poem. I love the really intricate byplay of the words. I just think that's really well done. Of course, you already know, I prefer a rhyme in poetry. I admit that. I prefer a rhyme, and I prefer a nice galumphing, sing-songy Alexander Pope type rhythm. But if you're not going to have that, I'll take this. Absolutely. I'll take verses that have been whittled clean by an author who's thinking about them and nothing else, who's not trying to make it's only thinking about the poem. But anyway, so those are two poems from the New Yorker. One I thought was just plainly bad. Just a gimmick that went on too long. Something that the poet should have written, fine, go ahead, write it. But then don't think anything of it. Certainly don't submit it. And the poetry editor at the New Yorker, you don't take it. Even if the poet does submit it, you don't take it. It's a grammatical gimmick. But the other one, Etiology, which I think the pun of etiology is the eating, the chewing, the constant refrain of animals chewing on things. But one way or another, whether I'm wrong about that, I thought that was more accomplished. And as usual, on Poetry Tuesday, I want to hear what you think. I'll put both the poems down below, and we can just talk about whether or not either one of them worked for you, and so on and so forth. And then we'll come back, we'll reconvene next Tuesday for another poem, or two. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.